The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Straight ahead on this edition of Perspectives, we go front and center on the issue of race in America. It's said that we live in a post-racial America. The question is yes or no. That, the Donald Sterling comments, and much more on this edition of Perspectives. And hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Perspectives. I'm Darren Jaime. We encourage you to stay connected to our show as we bring you all the latest news and information. You can catch us here on the TV, as well as you can catch us on our social networking sites. Hit us up on Facebook and or Twitter, and there you can catch some past episodes of the show, share your comments about the show, and let us know what you'd like to see. One of the things that's been a topic of discussion with a lot of people have been talking to me about and stopped me about on the street is the whole issue of race. Darren, when are we going to talk about race in America? And when are we going to talk about whether or not racism is really real or is it gone? Well, coming up on this edition of Perspectives, you get just that. The conversation about race in America. The questions after Donald Sterling's comments, the former owner of the Los Angeles Clippers making disparaging comments about race in America, talking about blacks, Magic Johnson, not having blacks come to basketball games. You also have the whole issue of affirmative action out in Michigan. And race seems to be at the forefront of what we're dealing with on a daily basis. Joining us here is a very esteemed panel to talk just about that. We'll start ladies first. We got Joyce Johnson, who is here with us, political strategist, and also another political strategist, Roy Paul. And also we've got Dr. Ed Culvert, who's a professor at Lehman College and also the editor of the Culvert Chronicles as seen across New York City. And glad to have you all sharing with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let me start front and center with the question. We talked about post-racial America, said that we have a post-racial America. Let me start with Roy, since you're in the middle, the man in the middle. Are we living in a post-racial America? Yes, no.
Well, racism certainly does still exist. To be black in America means that you are presumed guilty before innocent, and we see that with several cases across the country. And it's a problem, especially for young people of my generation, because we have to carry the torch, so to speak. But we can't do that unless we get the support from the communities that we live in that allow us to be equal members of our societies, and we racially do not have that experience.
Mm-hmm.
The short answer is absolutely not. There's been no post-racial America. And I want to know who said that, because post-racial means that there's something pre that substantively changed. I've not seen that change. And so there's no post. And if the idea was because, and I think this is where it comes in, with President Obama's election, that, you know, we entered in a new day, that we're all equal and all of that. Look how the president himself is being treated, disparaging remarks that have made. We are not in a post-racial society. We have much to do because we've not really owned up to the notion of racism. Mm-hmm. There's a sizable population in the country that would absolutely reject the notion that there's racism, and they blame those who said that this is a racial issue for being out of touch, out of date, and fanning the flames of animosity. Mm-hmm. So
Dr. Culvert, you spent time with Martin Luther King Jr., and You were extensively involved in the movement, and I want to ask you the question, given the fact of where we are today, what would Martin Luther King say about us being a post-racial America?
My thinking would be somewhat different. Things have changed. The fact that we have a black president is something that most of the people of my generation never thought that they would see. If we look at the figures, and that's what politics is all about. That's why it's called political science, not political I think or political I feel, but it's a science, something that can be replicated. What President Obama did was to form coalitions of blacks, whites, and Latinos to be elected to public office. There are only 12% of the population of America is black, which means that if everybody in America who was black voted for Obama, he would still lose. He had to have coalitions. Politics nowadays is not necessarily built on race and ethnicity. It's built on building coalitions of people who have similar interests. And as a result of that, many of the politicians now are not thinking along racial lines, they're thinking along interest lines.
Mm-hmm. Let me lean on what he's saying, and he says there has been some progress made. And when you look at nobody would argue that there is that progress has not been made, but I think there's still some things that need to be tackled and dealt with.
You know, I couldn't agree with him more. It's about coalition, and President, I don't want to use President Obama as the example of everyday life, because he's the President of the United States, and there are 14% of the folks who may be living a different experience. And the fact that there's no denying the Civil Rights Act of 65, the Johnson era, affirmative action, all of that. But in the face of that, look at now we have a Supreme Court who, and people who are going to taking the Supreme Court way to say to throw back from affirmative action. You know, the affirmative action, and I think the discussion is not about the politics, because Donald Sterling is not in politics, but he made very charged racial remarks. You know, as did, and don't forget, back in 2012 election, so did Mitt Romney, the 47%, where he said basically, and while he was saying 40% of the folks will vote for the president come heck or high water, he was really talking about the code words of those who are on welfare, those who need public assistance, those who don't work, those who are looking for the handout. And that is typically subscribed to us, even though, you know, we are not the majority of any of those elements. So race and racism are still inherent in the country, not inherent, but it's still there. The politics is one thing. I think the Obama was because I was his state field director, and there are wonderful and great Americans, but there is an undercurrent. My mother used the same terms. She thought she would never see the day when an African American would be president. We must remember there was that other side, those from Southern days, from just 50 years ago, who were saying the same thing and have done everything in their power to undo his presidency and much of our legacy of civil rights.
Roy's not in the same generation, we'll say. And
is it that obvious?
Slightly, Roy, slightly. But let me ask the question, Roy.
He's my baby brother.
That's it.
By 10 years.
There you go. Baby brother, let me ask the question. As you look around and you see the young movement really picking up the mantle and talking about civil rights, give us a little bit of perspective of the younger generation's civil rights perspective, given the fact we're talking about race. It was prevalent in the 60s and 70s. How is it perceived now?
Yeah, and I think there's a misconception that young people, especially young African Americans, aren't really engaged in the movement as we should be. We don't particularly care about, you know, carrying the torch, and I think that's not true. I think that you know, there's a section of us where you have to really meet us where we are. You know, some people are in hip hop and other people are in politics, and you've got to meet people where they are, and it is very, you know, industry specific. But I think that with my counterparts that I see just from the nonprofit political world, there is a grave effort to be in part of the process in a very profound way. I think sometimes when we try to be involved, there's the elders who want to keep us in a box. And if we say we want to speak out at a rally, if there's a civil rights rally going on, well, you can be there, but you don't have to speak. And we want to play a profound role in what's going on, and I think that's where the mantle has to be given to us so that we can continue the work that other people have done, and Dr. Culvert is one of them who have done that, and there is a great deal of respect that goes to people like him who have paved the way for people like myself who can come up and do what we're doing now. But I think that until we have a system that appreciates and accepts everyone, irrespective of where you come from, then we cannot be in a post-racial society, because it still exists somewhere, and if it exists somewhere, then that's the problem in itself. President Obama has done an amazing thing with himself, and look, a lot of people still can't believe that he's been able to ascend to the highest elected office in the land, but that doesn't mean that racism doesn't exist, and we see that it still exists. And I think that's where the problem is. If it exists somewhere, then that's where the problem needs to be tackled.
Racism does exist, and if you ask Donald Sterling, he doesn't see any problem with it. If you ask the rest of America, huge problem. Coming up after the break, we'll talk about Donald Sterling's comments and what exactly does it mean to be black in America.
You can say with me, imagine what you'd see if every child had a book to read.
So the mission is for us to get a book to each and every child.
So let's join hands, book people unite. Unearth hidden passion. Come on, we'll have a good time.
One book can be the first thing helps to change a life. Book people unite.
Read to a child today and spark a lifetime of ambition.
All right, give me a spot. You know my motto, safety first.
They could be dangerous. I think we should call animal control.
Animal control?
To be safe.
Don't worry.
Just...
I got this. It's a new motto.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who don't need perfection. They need you.
I don't know what's happening. Start a new chat. What did I do? Okay. Wow. It's so weird.
Hey! Hi!
Oh my gosh. Hi! God, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm so nervous. Gia, you're so big. Come closer to the camera. Wait, now you're in my face. That was so good.
Former Los Angeles Clippers owner Donald Sterling made national and international headlines when he made disparaging comments talking about blacks in reference to Magic Johnson, in reference to coming to basketball games, comments that shocked, outraged, and literally set America on fire. The response, revolt from the National Basketball Association players, the union, and everyone else in America who really understood that somebody seems to be way out of touch. But the truth of the matter is, Donald Sterling isn't by himself. There are a whole lot of people who share Donald Sterling's views. The question about what Donald Sterling said, the whole issue of the Sterling comments, we now turn to as the topic of discussion here. And let me go first with the elder statesman and give us a quick response here. Your thoughts to the Sterling comments.
First of all, let's look at the structure of America. We have a Constitution, and under the First Amendment of the Constitution, you can pretty much have freedom of speech. This man owned the team. His conversation with his lady was taped surreptitiously. The police department of the city of New York cannot even tape a conversation without getting a signed warrant from a judge. Jesse Jackson fell into the same thing when he thought the mic was closed and he said he was going to cut Obama's nuts out. Nobody jumped on him and said they wanted to tar and feather him. He also said that while he was counseling President Clinton about his indiscretions with Monica Lewinsky. He fathered a child out of wedlock.
So are we saying that Donald Sterling got a bum deal?
I'm saying that we have not heard the last of Donald Sterling. He's not a dumb man. He's going to sue the pants off anybody that tries to take his team away from him. If the young lady he was talking to had any money, he would sue her and he would win in the courts.
I thought I was going to be the only one with that opinion. It's the legal issue, and then there's a social issue, and I think sometimes we try to mix them into each other, and we can't do that. We have to be very careful when we do that. It's a very slippery slope. Were his comments racist? Absolutely. Should he go to jail? No. There was nothing illegal that he did by saying that, and he has the right to be a racist, quite frankly. Should he be forced to sell his team? Absolutely not. He owns the team. He bought the team fair and square, and if someone wants to buy the team and make him an offer, they can do that. You can boycott the team, but to force him to sell it, I think, is wrong.
Why?
Well, because he has the right to make the comments that he makes.
But I think that when you join an organization, there's certain rules and regulations within that organization.
I don't think he signed a contract when he bought the team that said you cannot be a racist.
There's a constitution and some bylaws.
You can boycott the team. The players who are on the team can leave the team, but to force him to sell it might end up happening by virtue of what will happen by the boycotts, etc. But you cannot tell him who owns the team outright to sell it. It's like having a home. I own my home, if I owned a home, if it was enough money to do that. If I owned a home and I made a racist remark to the New York One, came to my house, and I said, I hate X, Y, and Z. You can't force me to sell my home. You can do whatever you want to publicly to me. You can harass me outside my home, but you cannot force me to sell it. And I think what we're trying to do here is tell a man who legally owns his team, because we don't like what you say, you're not allowed to own a team, and that's wrong.
Is this
much of this, I don't agree. And I don't agree because I think the overwhelming now, we've got a school of public opinion. And this is all, at the end of the day, this is a country that is a democracy, free speech, but it's also capitalist. And the NBA is a big industry, and the NBA is taking a lead from the hue and cry from the masses of folks that said that we don't like this. And so there is the politics of I don't like and the pressure that goes with this. Jesse Jackson also made a statement in 1984 about Hymietown, and frankly was forever...
He's talking about me.
No, not Jaime. Hymietown being New York, and you remember the hue and cry, and yes, he was punished all for that. Mitt Romney, in the course of a private conversation, made what was seen as disparaging remarks. He had freedom of speech and the right to do so, but American public rose up to, arguably, that contributed to his demise as a president.
But you can't force him to jump out.
But no, you could not force him. But you push him out. But the NBA is saying, because they read tea leaves, the public opinion. You know, this country moved. The civil rights movement moved on public opinion. John F. Kennedy, LBJ did not want to go that far with the laws that they enacted.
Okay, so let me...
We're arguing about apples and peaches.
How do you feel?
The NBA is run to make money. The man in the street buys some tickets, but corporate America buys blocks of tickets to those NBA games. I watched the games after he made his remarks. I didn't see any vacant seats there.
Not yet. Let's say not yet.
But don't forget there were three sponsors, three big sponsors that immediately
pulled out. And you also had the Players Association who said, listen, if something wasn't done by taking him out by way of banning him for life, you would have seen a revolt, and you just saw players actually boycott. Let me move in another direction,
though. But he can still own the team and be banned for life.
Yeah, that's a possibility. But let me ask this: the freedom to make those comments. You know, the question of being an owner and being free to make those comments. Should he be free enough to make those comments and be okay?
But he should also be free to, and he is, to take the consequences. And that's the point. You can say what you want. You know, Mitt Romney, a lot of these things, so there is now the politics of privacy. As a private man, yeah, I can say this, that, and another. But there may be consequences. I happen to be just regular Joyce Johnson. But the public, and this is the pressure, and this is the volume of politics of people, rank and file tied to economics. If the NBA didn't think that there were any consequences to this, You know, it took them a couple of days to come out with something so we're going to ban, you're going to sell, we're going to take this away from you. You don't need to be attached to this. You know, once again, making it hard to be a racist. And if he is, he said, well, I did this in private. But now, what we all have to be careful of, there is no such thing as privacy. Why? Because everybody has
legally there is.
Right.
Everybody has. There was a post in the Daily News where a guy kicked you saw that, kicked a cat,
yeah.
And it went viral. And now the police are after him. He did that in his private time, joke, not whatever, craziness, and did that.
But it was against the law. Sterling did nothing that was against the law.
To kick the cat?
Yes.
It's against the law to kick a cat,
Yes, indeed.
but it's not. But the bad part is, it's not against the law to make racial damaging.
It's not for freedom of speech, but once again, the consequences.
What we're confusing moral and legal.
Okay, so let's move off. Let's move off the legal term. Let's talk about the moral term, because morally, it's morally reprehensible.
Oh, right.
You got a lot.
I think Dr. Culver and I agree that he should sell the team. We're just saying he shouldn't be forced to sell the team. If he still wants to own it, he has the legal right to.
He has no trial. He has no hearing. You're just going to take the man and kick him out because you said something you didn't like. You didn't like.
Well, if someone wants to buy him,
and a lot of
make him a
people
legitimate
agree
offer,
with him.
let's do that.
But they don't come out and say it.
That's why I said, because when you look at this particular issue, if you go back and study the notes, Mark Cuban immediately after says a man shouldn't be forced to take his team. However, we now know the NBA forced the matter, because when Adam Silver makes the announcement that we're banning him for life, we're fining him 2.5 the maximum, and we want him to sell the team. Now, all of a sudden, Mark Cuban says, I 100% support the NBA's decision and whatever they do. Now, 2 days ago, you didn't support it. You thought the man should have had it. Right. Public outcry means a whole lot. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that when we return. Got to take a quick break. Yes, my guests have, got the conversation going, but we got to take a break. Come back in just a few seconds.
Wow, these are really good.
You act surprised. Practice makes perfect.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who don't need perfection. They need you.
Being a dad can be tough.
No. What do you mean she's not coming?
When's the fairy princess coming?
Any minute now.
But when you're willing to do anything...
It is I, Cruz Zinkelpel. Okay, time for cake.
It's always worth it.
I know it's really you, Drew. I'm just pretending for the other kids.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today. Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov.
Maybe he's really focused.
Maybe he likes spinning the wheels.
Maybe he just loves trucks.
Preoccupation with objects is one early sign of autism. Learn the others today.
Continuing our conversation about race in America, talking about the Donald Sterling comments, and we can take a whole show on that, but I need to get to another topic before we move on. I want to talk about the issue of the affirmative action ban upheld by the Supreme Court in the Michigan case dealing with students and education. Let me go to the chief educator first. Dr. Culver, you got to talk quick because I want to get everybody else in this one.
Very quickly. We're going back to the way things used to be before affirmative action. That's a new phenomenon. And while Michigan is doing away with affirmative action, there's something behind that also, and that is the criteria that people are using now that has been passed in 9 states in terms of voting. Those 9 states have changed the way you have to identify yourself to vote. In other words, those 9 states that were pivotal in the Obama winning the election have now turned around, one being North Carolina, which has said now you have to have certain identification before you can even vote. This thing is much bigger than we think it is, and what we need to do when we start looking at the gentleman from the Bronx is find out where he's getting his money, and if you do the research, you're going to find out the Tea Party is behind a whole lot of money coming into the state of New York to beat Charlie Rangel.
Well, I didn't want to follow that. But there are a lot of jobs that have been created for people who otherwise wouldn't have had them because of affirmative action. There have been departments created. Joyce Johnson herself had an equal opportunity at Seagram's. I probably wouldn't have been there without affirmative action. I've been on job interviews myself where they said, look, we need to hire minority candidates because we don't have any of them here. And so we absolutely need it, and I think to do away with it would be a shame.
You talk about Adriana Espinat, talking about that race, the race, but I need to be clear.
All people need to do is stay around CUNY for 40 years, call some of your students, and have them to check out things, and you'll find out what's going on.
All right.
I'm going to stay close to him because I want to know. But the affirmative action, the dismantling, the voting rights, it takes us back, pre-1964. And that's a larger, that is part of the race issue because who is adversely affected? Those, quote, minorities. Minorities used to be blacks, but throughout the country now, it is the fear of the Hispanic majority in a lot of states, Texas and, well, the South as well. And so this is a throwback to we have got to turn the tide. Sadly, Sotomayor was absolutely right. This is a throwback to the days of gone, and we don't have the numbers. Our politics, the Supreme Court, the laws of the land, or whatever it comes down, the 5-4 is deadly. This is only the beginning of the unrolling.
All right, and Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor from this area, the Bronx, writing a dissenting decision saying that this is absolutely the wrong direction in which to go.
Because one other thing, Darren, and that is the fact in the Voting Rights Act of Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it was set up to gerrymander districts so that blacks would have representation in the Congress. One of the persons who came out of that gerrymandering was Shirley Chisholm out of Brooklyn.
That's right.
So when we talk about this here, and you see that the final result of what occurs, one of the justices said, it shouldn't have to be this way. The question is, will it ever get to where it needs to be with the fact that you've now dismantled affirmative action?
And I appreciate that point. It should not have to be, but it is. And that's why we had affirmative action measures. Because I was a director of EEO, and affirmative action simply said, the country looks like this. Let's take affirmative action to get the best and brightest who in that mix of all should be within our workplace, should be have opportunity for houses, and on and on and on. And we've now said, the 5 justices says, basically, that's not the way it should be, but it is, and that's the point that we started this conversation with. Race matters in America, because the dismantling, who does it affect? Those people of color. Does it affect white folks?
Thing, too, you have to
quote
consider.
The majority population.
Affirmative action not only dealt with color, it also dealt with women, and it dealt with the handicapped.
All right, well, we got to end on that note, and so thank you all for coming and joining us. Joyce Johnson, Roy Paul, Dr. Ed Culver, as always, interesting and lively discussion, and we got to have you back to continue for round 2. That about wraps it up for this particular edition of Perspectives. And just a point of clarity, when people talk about race and the race card and blacks in America, oftentimes it's assumed that blacks are looking for something, or minorities in general are looking for something of greater proportion. Not true. All people are asking for is an equal playing field, equal rights, and that's exactly what all of the Voting Rights Act and everything else, the affirmative action, everything else that's been ascribed to the whole civil rights movement was about. It wasn't about having one leg up. It was just about reaching a level of an equal playing field. And until the level of an equal playing field is reached, I'm sure you're going to continue to hear voices raised in concern until that day comes. That about wraps up for this edition of Perspectives. I'm Darren Hyman. We invite you to stay close to Perspectives. You've had the information at the bottom of your screen. Until the next time we meet, stay safe and share your perspective with somebody else, because it just might make a difference in their life. Take care.
That was a nice wrap up.
A single ember from a wildfire can travel over a mile. That ember can ignite and destroy your home or community. You can't control where that ember will land. Only what happens before it does. Visit fireadapted.org to learn how you can help protect your community from wildfires.